Two people move their faces close together. They stop talking. They tilt their heads slightly so their noses do not collide, and then they press the soft, wet edges of their mouths against each other and hold still. Sometimes they open those mouths. Sometimes they trade a little saliva back and forth. And to everyone around them, this is not strange at all. It is the most normal thing in the world. It shows up in songs, in films, on billboards, at the end of almost every love story ever told. But look at the act itself, coldly, the way a scientist would. The mouth is the single dirtiest opening on the human body. It is warm, it is wet, and it holds hundreds of different kinds of bacteria at any given moment. When two people press their mouths together for 10 seconds, researchers have estimated that they pass around 80 million bacteria between them. If you wrote down the pure mechanics of it, with no music and no candlelight, it would read like the description of an illness spreading, not like romance. And yet humans keep doing it, on purpose, and calling it beautiful. So here is the real question this whole video is built around, and it is a genuinely strange one once you sit with it. Where did this come from? Not the feeling, not the movies, but the actual physical habit of pressing mouth to mouth. Did the first humans do it 100,000 years ago, around a fire, with no soap and no toothbrush and no word for love yet invented? Or did somebody, somewhere, invent kissing the way we invented the handshake and then teach it to the rest of the world? If questions like this are the kind of thing that makes your brain lean forward, this is a good channel to subscribe to, because we chase exactly these threads all the way down. And this one goes very deep, because for a long time, most scientists were quietly sure that kissing was modern, a cultural invention, a habit, like using a fork, that some societies picked up and others never did. And the evidence they pointed to is honestly shocking the first time you hear it. In 2015, 3 anthropologists, William Jankowiak, Shelley Volsche, and Volsche Garcia, published a study in the journal American Anthropologist that did something nobody had properly done before. They went through 168 separate cultures from every corner of the planet and asked one clean question about each one. Do the people here kiss on the mouth, romantically, as lovers? Now, most people would guess the answer is yes, everywhere, obviously. It is not. Romantic sexual kissing appeared in fewer than half of those cultures. In only about 46% of human societies studied, did pressing your lips to a partner's mouth count as a normal romantic act. And in a lot of the other cultures, people were not simply neutral about it, they were disgusted. When outsiders were seen kissing, some communities reacted with open horror. Their reasoning was actually very logical. Why, they asked, would you put your face against the hole another person uses to eat, to spit, to breathe out sickness? To them, the thing we treat as the height of tenderness looked like something closer to licking a doorknob. This is not a modern politeness or a rare exception either. Charles Darwin himself noticed it back in 1872 in his book on human expression, where he wrote about peoples who did not kiss at all and instead pressed noses, or sniffed, or patted to show affection. Among many Inuit communities, there is a greeting sometimes called kunik, where you press your nose and upper lip against a loved one's skin and breathe in their scent, which outsiders have long misread as an Eskimo kiss, but which is really about smell, not lips. And in the early 20th century, the anthropologist Bronislaw Malinowski lived among the Trobriand Islanders in the Pacific and described their idea of passion, which included lovers biting each other, tugging at lips, even nibbling off one another's eyelashes. To them, gentle mouth pressing would have seemed tame and a little pointless. So the map of human intimacy is genuinely wild. What one culture treats as the sweetest possible act, another finds absurd, and a third replaces with something that would alarm us. So kissing on the mouth clearly is not a pure human instinct that automatically switches on inside every single person. If it were hardwired in that simple way, every culture on Earth would do it without being taught, the same way every baby cries. But they do not all do it, which means that somewhere in our history, the romantic version of this habit had to begin in one place, or a few places, and then spread from group to group and be learned. So the trail has a starting point. The only question is how far back it goes. And to find out, we have to start with the oldest hard proof and then dig underneath it. The oldest hard proof is written down, and it is astonishingly old. In the ruins of ancient Mesopotamia, in what is now Iraq, archaeologists have recovered clay tablets more than 4,000 years old, pressed with cuneiform, one of the very first writing systems humans ever built. And on some of those tablets, in among the accounts of grain and gods and kings, are descriptions of lovers kissing. In 2023, 2 researchers at the University of Copenhagen, Troels Pank Arbøll and Sophie Lund Rasmussen, gathered this evidence together in the journal Science, and they pushed the confident date of romantic kissing back to at least 2,500 years before Christ. That is 4,500 years ago, at minimum, a person recording the fact that 2 people kissed. And their study did something even more interesting than move the date. It challenged an idea that had been floating around, from an earlier claim that kissing had a single birthplace in South Asia only about 1,500 years before Christ. Arbøll and Rasmussen showed that the Mesopotamian evidence was 1,000 years older than that, and that kissing appears in early records across several ancient societies at once. Their argument was simple and powerful. Kissing was probably not invented in one tidy spot and then exported like a product. It was already widespread and ordinary across the ancient world, which suggests it was far, far older than any single document. But those same ancient tablets carry a warning buried inside them, and it is one that will feel eerily familiar. They describe a sickness that travels from mouth to mouth. 4,000 years ago, people had already noticed that this act passed something invisible between two humans. They did not know it was a virus. They had no idea what a virus even was. But the same 2023 science study points out that these texts describe a disease with symptoms that match herpes, the cold sore virus, and that kissing may have helped it spread. In fact, a separate genetic study led by Mariam Gwalil and published in 2022 tracked ancient DNA of the herpes simplex virus and suggested that a rise in romantic kissing during the Bronze Age may have helped one facial strain of it take over. So the ancients knew, in their own way, that kissing could make you sick, and they wrote it down. And then they kept kissing anyway, which tells you something about how strong the pull already was. Still, 4,500 years is nothing in the story of our species. Writing itself is only about 5,000 years old, so the written record can only ever show us the very tail end of this, the final chapters. The habit is obviously older than any tablet a scribe pressed into clay. So to go back further than writing, we have to put down the documents entirely and look at two things instead: the human body and our closest living relatives. And that is where this stops being history and starts being biology. Because here is the fact that quietly breaks the whole kissing is a modern invention theory in half. We are not the only species that does it. Watch bonobos, the apes that share close to 99% of their DNA with us. They kiss constantly, and not politely either. Open mouths, tongues, long contact. The primatologist Frans de Waal, who spent decades watching them, has described bonobos giving each other deep kisses that would startle a human onlooker. Chimpanzees, our other closest cousins, press their mouths together too, but they use it differently. De Waal documented chimps kissing to make peace after a fight, to calm each other down when tensions rose. So mouth-to-mouth contact, done to feel safe and connected, was already running inside our family tree long before anything like a modern human existed. And bonobos and chimps are only the start of it, because mouth-to-mouth contact turns out to be scattered all across the animal world. Elephants greet each other by putting the tip of their trunk into another elephant's mouth, a gesture researchers read as trust and reassurance, since the trunk is one of the most sensitive and precious parts of their body. Wolves and dogs do something even closer to us. Puppies lick and nuzzle the mouths of the adults, and that licking actually triggers the grown wolves to bring up food for them, which is why your own dog may still try to lick your face, a leftover of that ancient food and safety signal first described by the ethologist Konrad Lorenz. And many birds feed each other beak to beak during courtship, the male passing food into the female's mouth before they mate, a behavior biologists literally call courtship feeding. So the pattern of pushing food and comfort through the mouth to a loved one is not a strange human quirk at all. It is written across mammals and birds alike. And that single fact drags the origin of kissing back not by thousands of years, but by millions. If bonobos and chimps and humans all do a version of it, then the common ancestor we share with them, an ape that lived somewhere between 6 and 8 million years ago, may already have had the seed of the behavior. Which means the interesting question quietly changes. It is no longer really about when. When is almost too old to measure. The far better question, the one that actually explains why you are the way you are, is why. Why would evolution ever build an animal that wants to push its mouth against another animal's mouth and swap spit? What is the payoff big enough to be worth 80 million bacteria? One answer is beautifully simple and a little bit gross. Go back to a time before soft baby food, before anyone could hand an infant a jar of mush or a mashed banana. A mother could not give a hard piece of meat or root to a baby with no teeth, so she chewed it herself, softened it in her own mouth, and then pushed that soft food directly from her lips into the baby's lips. This is called kiss feeding or premastication, and it is not a wild guess. Anthropologists have recorded human mothers doing it across many different cultures and continents, right up into modern times. And think about what that mouth-to-mouth act meant to a tiny brain still forming. It meant food, warmth, safety, and love arriving all at once, through the lips of the person you trusted most in the world. Several researchers have argued that this early, deep link between mouth contact and being cared for never fully switched off. It stayed wired into us, and later in life it re-emerged, pointed at partners instead of parents, and slowly became the kiss. But there is a second reason, and this one is not about babies at all. It is about choosing a mate, and it is happening inside your body without your permission. When two people bring their faces that close together, closer than at almost any other moment in life, a huge amount of information passes between them that has nothing to do with the lips. You are, without deciding to, tasting and smelling the other person at point-blank range, their breath, the chemistry on their skin, the faint signals in their saliva, and your body is reading all of it, running a kind of biological background check. This is also why the lips are such a strange choice of tool in the first place. When neuroscientists map how much of the brain is devoted to feeling each part of the body, the lips take up a huge, out-of-proportion share, far more than their small size would suggest, packed with nerve endings that make them one of the most sensitive patches of skin we own. So pressing them together is not a random gesture. It is aiming two of the body's richest sensors straight at another person. And the thing it is most interested in is the immune system. There is a famous experiment from 1995 by the Swiss biologist Klaus Wedekind, sometimes called the sweaty t-shirt study. He had women smell shirts that different men had worn, and it turned out the women tended to prefer the scent of men whose immune system genes, a cluster called the MHC, were most different from their own. The evolutionary logic is clean. Parents with very different immune genes tend to have children with broader, stronger immune defenses. A kiss puts your nose and mouth right into the richest source of those chemical signals a person has. So on some level, a first kiss works like a test you cannot consciously read the results of. Sometimes the test comes back wrong, the closeness feels off in a way that is hard to explain, and one person quietly pulls away without ever knowing why. The ancient hardware just returned a no, and two psychologists took this idea even further. Gordon Gallup and Susan Hughes, working at the University at Albany, ran surveys and studies in the mid-2000s asking people what kissing actually did for them, and they found sharp differences between the sexes. Women, on average, rated kissing as more important and used a first kiss heavily to decide whether to keep seeing someone at all. A bad kiss could end an attraction on its own. Men, on average, were more likely to treat kissing as a route towards something else and to prefer wetter, more open-mouth kisses. Gallup suggested a slightly startling explanation for that last part. Male saliva carries testosterone, and a messier, deeper kiss transfers more of it, which over long stretches of evolutionary time might nudge a partner's body chemistry. Whether or not that specific idea holds up, their core finding was hard to argue with. A kiss is not just a reward. It is a moment where two people gather a flood of private information about each other and quietly make a decision. And there is even a fingerprint of how ancient and deep-wired all of this is, hidden in something as small as which way people turn their heads. In 2003, the German neuroscientist Onur Günterkuhn stood in airports, train stations, and parks and secretly watched 124 couples kiss. He found that about 2/3 of them tilted their heads to the right rather than the left. That same rightward lean shows up in babies in the womb and in newborns turning their heads, which suggests the tiny choreography of a kiss is not learned from films at all. It is running on a bias built into the brain before we are even born. And when the test comes back yes, your brain does something dramatic. A good kiss triggers a flood of chemistry inside your head. In 2009, the neuroscientist Wendy Hill and her students at Lafayette College actually measured this. They had couples kiss and then checked their blood and saliva, and they found that kissing shifted levels of oxytocin, the bonding chemical that also links a mother to her newborn, and lowered cortisol, the main stress hormone. Other research ties kissing to dopamine, the same reward chemical that drives craving and focus and the early obsessive stage of falling in love, studied for years by the anthropologist Helen Fisher. And this bonding chemistry runs deeper in nature than most people realize. The clearest proof comes from a small rodent called the prairie vole, one of the few mammals that forms lifelong pairs. Biologists like Sue Carter and Larry Young spent years showing that when these voles bond, their brains are washed in oxytocin and a related chemical called vasopressin, the very same molecules moving through a kissing human. Block those chemicals and the voles stop pairing up. So the bonding system a kiss switches on is not some delicate human invention. It is an ancient piece of mammal wiring, tested and proven in animals that have never seen a candle or heard a love song. So the racing heart, the widened pupils, the strange drop in the stomach, none of that is poetry. It is a chemical bonding system, far older than any culture, doing exactly the job it was built to do. The candlelight and the music are just the modern wrapping paper. The machine underneath is pure prehistory. But it is only fair to say that scientists still argue about all of this, and the argument itself is revealing. Because if kissing were a simple, hardwired survival instinct, it really should be everywhere, and we have already seen that it is not. So some researchers think kissing is not a raw instinct at all, but a cultural tool that our biology made us very good at picking up. At Oxford, Raphael Wlodarski and Robin Dunbar studied this directly in the early 2010s, and their findings pointed to kissing working mainly as a way to size up a possible partner and then to keep a bond strong once it exists. They found that people in committed relationships who kissed more often reported happier partnerships, and that the link to kissing was tighter than the link to how often the couple had sex. In other words, kissing may be less about the spark of a single night and more about the slow glue that holds two people together over years. Which fits everything else we have seen. An old animal behavior aimed by biology, but switched on, shaped and named differently by every culture that inherits it. So now take all of those pieces, the primate roots, the kiss feeding, the immune test, the flood of bonding chemicals, and picture what our ancestors most likely were. 100,000 years ago, on a cold night, two young humans sit close to a fire. There is barely any language for flirting yet, if there is any at all. There is no privacy, no perfume to cover a scent, no way to send a message the next morning. There is only the firelight, the dark pressing in around the edge of the camp, and another warm body a few inches away. And with all of that ancient wiring already switched on inside them, the ape wiring, the infant wiring, the immune wiring, they do the one thing the body already understood without being taught. They lean in. And we now know, from their bones and their DNA, that these early humans were not always leaning toward their own kind. For tens of thousands of years, our species shared the planet with the Neanderthals, and the two groups did not only compete. In 2010, a team led by Svante Pääbo published the first Neanderthal genome and proved something people had argued about for decades. Humans and Neanderthals had children together. If you are of non-African descent, roughly 1 to 2% of your own DNA is Neanderthal, sitting inside you right now as you listen to this. And it gets more intimate than that. When scientists studied ancient dental plaque and the germs living in the mouths of Neanderthals and early humans, work published by Laurentia Weyrich and colleagues in 2017 in the journal Nature, they found the two groups shared certain mouth microbes, the kind that mostly pass between people through saliva, which means that more than 100,000 years ago, two different kinds of human were close enough and often enough to be swapping spit. Whatever you want to call that, it is the deep, buried root of the very ordinary thing people do today. But the specific version most of the modern world now takes for granted, the romantic kiss as a normal, expected step in dating and marriage, spread much later, and this part we can almost watch happen on a map. One anthropologist who spent much of his career on this, Vaughn Bryant, of Texas A&M University, traced the written trail of romantic kissing and argued that it grew especially strong in ancient India, where sacred texts described it in detail and then traveled outward. One likely carrier was the army of Alexander the Great, which pushed into India around 326 years before Christ and may have brought the custom back west as it returned. And the Indian records themselves are strikingly detailed. The Kama Sutra, written down by Vatsyayana around the 3rd century after Christ, but drawing on far older material, devotes whole passages to types of kisses and where and how to give them, treating the act as a real skill to be learned. From there, the practice found an even more enthusiastic home, because the Romans were, frankly, obsessed with kissing, and they were so precise about it that they used 3 different words for 3 different kinds. There was the osculum, a friendly or respectful kiss, usually on the cheek, the kind you might give a relative. There was the basium, a warmer kiss of genuine affection between people who were close. And there was the savium, the deep, hungry, passionate kiss reserved for lovers. Roman writers argued about kissing, joked about it, wrote poems about it, and even debated the etiquette of who was allowed to kiss whom in public. And as the Roman Empire spread across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, it carried its habits with it, the way any empire spreads its fashions and its language. Something that had been one custom among many slowly hardened into the default across a huge slice of the planet, until it could look, to us, like it had simply always been universal. It never was. And after Rome, the kiss did not stay locked inside romance either. It spread sideways into public life. The early Christian church built a ritual called the kiss of peace, the osculum passus, where worshippers greeted each other with a kiss as a sign of unity, though church leaders later grew nervous about it and restricted who could kiss whom. Across medieval Europe, a kiss became a kind of legal seal, a way to make an agreement binding. People kissed to close a deal, and lords and vassals sealed their loyalty with a kiss during ceremonies of homage. That is where an old phrase like sealed with a kiss actually comes from. So for long stretches of history, the mouth press was not only about lovers at all. It was a signature, a peace treaty, a promise you could not easily take back, which shows just how powerful the gesture had become once it took hold. So the honest answer to the question, when did ancient humans start kissing, is not a single date. It comes in layers, like almost everything true about a human being. The polished romantic kiss, the one written into poems and spread by empires, is a few thousand years old at most. The plain habit of pressing mouths together for comfort, safety, and bonding is millions of years old, older than our species, inherited from the same apes who still do it in the forest today. And the specific picture of two humans leaning toward each other in the dark, because every ancient system in the body was already telling them to, has almost certainly been happening for as long as there have been humans at all to do it. But there is one more layer worth sitting with, because it is easy to make this sound like a pure love story, and it never was. That warning on the clay tablets was real. Every kiss has always carried a cost. It spreads the cold sore virus and glandular fever, the illness so tied to this act that it is nicknamed the kissing disease, and a long list of other bugs that ride happily from one mouth to the next. Evolution had every reason to make us fear that risk, the same way it made us fear rot and disease in food. And in many cultures, as we saw, it did exactly that, and the mouth stayed a border you did not cross. So the strangest thing about kissing is not that some peoples avoided it. The strange thing is that so many of us do it anyway, knowingly, pressing forward into a small real danger because the pull toward another warm mouth turned out, over millions of years, to be stronger than the fear. And that, in the end, is the quiet truth hiding under something people treat as ordinary. It is one of the oldest programs our kind still runs, half tenderness and half risk, written long before there were words for either. The fire has become a streetlight, or a phone screen glowing in a dark room. The cave has become an apartment. The animal, though, is exactly the same one that sat in the cold 100,000 years ago, weighing warmth against danger and choosing warmth. Those people were not so different from anyone alive now. They were us, sitting in the dark, leaning in. They were just waiting for the rest of the world to catch up.